This is called a compost.
Last year, I had this dream of converting the upper field into a garden. So seeds were purchased in January and then started indoors February through April. I wanted to try new varieties that were not found at my local nursery. I was ambitious and wanted to take the first year to try to grow as much as I could, see what works, and learn from what doesn't. Then in March, an unsound tree was cut down and removed.
Here we go.
A fence was then constructed by digging holes past the frost line, adding poles from a chain link fence that was saved, and then wrapping the whole thing with deer netting. April, the land was tiered and weeded, and then in May, 3 truck beds of soil were carried up using buckets and felt bags. This was exhausting yet rewarding work. Finally, being able to see the garden beds take form. This is the upper garden from the east entrance. I was able to get 3 tiers in with soil. And then this is where my tomatoes will go in those pots. I still need to build a trellis. Over here, I'm going to be building a compost. And then we have a garden bed here. So I was planning on doing irrigation. I bought a couple little irrigation heads to try out, but when I came up here, a deer had chomped off my dahlia. Oh, our poor grapes. My grandmother's heirloom tomatoes. Oh, and completely decimated our peach tree. Just stripped all of the leaves off this poor guy. June was a month of correcting mistakes. I feel like everything was done twice. The irrigation was overcomplicated, using soaker hoses and drip lines in a labyrinth pattern. I ended up taking it all apart and running a single line to the top of the garden with an overhead sprinkler, a shutoff valve, and a hose. This was a good lesson that often simpler is better. With all the fuss with the irrigation, planting was delayed. In July, we had the fence knocked down twice. So we took a weekend and wrapped the existing poles with metal farming wire. This was so hard because of the weight of the wire, the slope of the land, and this ridiculous octagon shape I'd made this garden. So we had some hard times with this garden so far this year. We've had just so many animals come into the garden and they pretty much eat everything before we can get to it. We have harvested 1 tomato so far. We have a couple of cherry tomatoes that I can pick today. They've eaten all of our strawberries, our blueberries, some of our cucumbers, my green peppers. They're literally eating more stuff than we are. So this fall or next spring, I'm gonna have to dig down all the way around the garden and put in some fine mesh wire just so we can eliminate kind of the smaller pests. We finally put up a proper fence for the deer. We haven't had any issues since then. So we're hoping that's no longer going to be a problem, but it's the little animals that are coming in. I don't know exactly what they are, but they're eating everything out of our garden. This is just an overview of everything. Our grape plant has recovered from the deer. We have the smallest little celery growing. And a few cauliflower, my dahlia. Over here we have some squash, corn, beans, and scallions. These beans are from my grandmother. She mailed me some seeds, so I just love the idea of growing something that she's been growing for so many years. And I love the way that they're just growing up the corn. We have our peach tree here, so we're not going to get any fruit this year, but hopefully next year. And then down here we have a raspberry bush. My Oma also sent me out about 10 varieties of her heirloom tomatoes. Some of them date back to when she lived in Europe. I never ended up building a trestle for my tomato plants. They're just kind of growing wild, but it doesn't really matter because they got destroyed by deer. So I only have a handful of tomatoes growing. So we'll see what happens here. This whole area was kind of a surprise to us. It was actually just a compost pile, and out of it, these squash all self-seeded. At first I thought they were going to be zucchini, which I wasn't overly happy about, but surprise, surprise, it turned out to be acorn squash. We also have this growing. If anybody knows what variety this is, please comment, because we have no idea. But we have this giant squash. This area has been a pleasant little surprise. Just kind of took off out of nowhere. So even though it's been kind of a failure this year, I think it's pretty amazing that we turned the garden from something that looked like this into this.